Hey, welcome to episode 2 of Thief. Here we have our concept art ready, and it's time to dive into the model. The first thing I do here is pull up a base mesh model. This is a human male that I made for another figure, and so I wasn't 100% happy with the female base mesh that I already had made, so I'm starting a fresh one from this male. I'm just going into the different body parts and making subtle adjustments to get an anatomical female base mesh. Here we've got the head. So I pretty much scrubbed the details, and this is going to be a good opportunity for you all to see how, as you work on art, there are a lot of really ugly stages. And you've got to keep working past those. You know, I'd imagine there are people out there that start making art or making a sculpture of a face or a drawing of a face and find that it looks disgusting. And I want to encourage you that the disgusting phase in art is really a normal part of it, and you keep working from there. And so this is a good example of that. This base mesh face that I make here is just a quick layout to make it a slightly more feminine model. Just so I don't have a big lumpy barbarian head there. From a base mesh and like a basic model standing in that way, you can really start making the character look how it's supposed to look. And that's quite common in animation and for video games. But for miniatures, you're a sculptor and you're sculpting, so you need to keep track of things as they are rather than making a complete figure that can stand in any pose. You're trying to make a sculpture, not a model that can be reposed. Now what I start doing here is pulling out a cylinder, squishing it down to make it the relative size and shape as a miniature's base. So in ZBrush there isn't a native scale, so you can't tell it, well, I want to make something that is 32 millimeters tall. Instead, what you've got to do is find a way to have a scale system in place for yourself. So I know that the bases are 25 millimeter, and I know that the model is supposed to be about 30 mil. So I can set up a relative scale system for myself. Next, what I start doing is isolating the different body parts and building the pose from there. One thing that's really helpful as a sculptor is once the figure is in its pose, I can start to imagine and put together how the body is reacting to this pose. So mechanically, how the hips are placed and how the muscles are pulling and tightening and reacting in different ways. So what I do next, after I have the body in its basic shape, is I go in and start thinking a lot about skeletal structures. You can see me putting markers in where there's hip bones and rib cages, and they're on the hip in the pelvic bone. And those are like think of them as navigational points as an artist. So as I start to navigate the human body, there are certain markers that I can always go back to. So after decades of figure drawing, I know that I can rely on certain bones and muscles to be in appropriate spots. And the pelvis and the rib cage, the knee and the hip are all really great places for that. Oh, and the collarbone too, for sure. I'm going in there into the neck and arm, shoulder, armpit. All of that stuff is really important to adding a level of believability to the figure, but she's going to be wearing clothes, and so smoothing it out and making a really like a highly detailed human isn't the point. What I need is a representation that's going to give me a good idea of how the body is reacting and where the movement and motion is going to be mechanically. Here I'm now appending new shapes. And I start with a sphere most of the time. It depends on the object, but I like to start with a sphere and start to shape it and use the move tool to squish it around and shape it like putty. And I'm making her torn thief cape. So I just kind of start going nuts. I mean, this is really a sketching phase, and so I'm blocking in the shapes, blocking in the general forms, blocking in the energy, and I approach sculpting a lot like I would approach a sketch. And if you watched episode 1, you know I keep it pretty loose, and I don't marry any of the details right away. I definitely move from general to specific. Here you can see that funky face that I sculpted starts to make a little bit more sense once I mash some hair onto it. Just like squishing the clay around and making general shapes and forms to try and work out the silhouette of the figure. That's one thing I wish I had gone more into in explaining to you guys is how important it is to keep in mind that this figure is going to be an inch tall when it's done. So how it's going to look from when you're standing and looking down at it versus how it'll look when you're holding it, those are all things you really got to keep in mind from the very beginning. Not to mention the way it's going to be cast and the mold's going to fit. So there you have it, guys. This is the blocking in for the figure. Really rough base. Now I have a good place to start when it's time to start cleaning it up, adding the details, and really starting to flesh out the character design in this figure.